On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, we speak with Julian Ahlquist, the son of the founder and president of the Chesterton Society, Dale Ahlquist, and one of the speakers for this summer's Chesterton Conference in New Orleans, where he will be presenting on what is sure to be one of the more provocative and controversial subjects on the docket.
Hi, good to be here.
Well, hello, Julian. Welcome. And we're joined as well by my colleague, Lee Sondano. Hi, Lee.
Hello, Joe.
And hopefully everyone out there knows me, Joe Grabowski. I'm one of the hosts of Uncommon Sense, our weekly podcast, the VP for Evangelization here at the Chesterton Society. And as I mentioned in that little teaser at the intro, we're going to be speaking today about one of the conference talks coming up this summer. This is something we're doing in an ongoing series of episodes on the podcast right now, kind of teasing and previewing the conference talks for those who might be interested in learning more about these subjects by coming and joining us in New Orleans at the end of July. And for those of you who are prohibited by travel or whatever other reason from coming, first of all, we do have a virtual participation option, so you can still get access to all that great content, but hopefully you'll also just find these episodes enjoyable as we get through these topics. But before we get into that, Julian, why don't you just tell us what you've been up to, introduce yourself to the viewers and listeners for those who might be unfamiliar.
Yeah, no problem. Julian Ahlquist, son of Dale Ahlquist. I'm a founding faculty member of the original Chesterton Academy. I designed a lot of the history and the philosophy curriculum for the Chesterton Schools Network. Been teaching there for almost, I think, 17 years now. I'm formalizing the curriculum constantly, so that's definitely a constant project. It's fun. On the side, I have a website that I barely update ever. It's Thomism.org. So Thomism, the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas, somehow got that domain name.
Good get,
I'm writing some sort of plain English versions of some Platonic dialogues. I came out with Plato's work called Gorgias a couple years ago. I'll have another one covering the dialogues that have to do with Socrates' trial and death. So that's coming out pretty soon. And we use that in the Chesterton network. So, I've always wanted to just distill, complicated philosophy stuff into more coherent language, especially for high school, since, I teach high school. But definitely as another side project that's just sort of a leisurely activity is that I've been doing a bunch of AI art, specifically about Catholic saints, almost exclusively. And I do that mostly, not mostly because it's enjoyable. It can be pretty difficult sometimes, but I'm doing it sort of as a labor of love. I've always wanted there to be more good religious Catholic art out there, and found this is a really efficient way to do so, and I've been really pleased with the results of this project. So that's what I've been up to.
All right, and it is that last point that you will be speaking about at the conference this coming summer, and there's been I know that there's been a lot of sort of back and forth in some of the Catholic media out there, Catholic articles written on this in different places, including your own contributions on the topic. It is very much sort of a live debate, the place of some of these technologies in the work of the church's mission in evangelization, but also just really in our anthropology as Christians. Yeah. And I think for those reasons, it's bound to be, a hot topic, something that people can get interested in. We're going to try to model today as we kind of broach the topic, sort of the spirit of Chestertonian candor and also the spirit of Chestertonian argument without acrimony, if argument must ensue, right? That Chesterton famously said that he and his brother Cecil, from the time Cecil was born, a few years later, started to argue, and they argued right up until his death, but they never once quarreled. And that's something we tried to, take very seriously here. And so, viewers, listeners, you might have your own views on this topic. By all means, please share those down in the comments below. but just remember to keep those Chestertonian principles in mind of agreeing to disagree and disagreeing agreeably. Um, so, Julian, yeah, maybe share with us a little bit about kind of what inspired you to kind of get into that use of some of these new emergent technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been sort of an amateur digital artist for like 25 years, very amateur. I've did Photoshop since the 90s, so I've always had sort of a foot in that world, usually just for fun. And had some classical training in hand drawn and hand painted art. And so a couple years ago, I guess this would have been about 3 years ago, I just saw a random YouTube video of a sort of prototype AI art program. It was called Dolly. It's which is made by the same company as ChatGPT. So I saw
Mm-hmm.
some samples of it. Person could just type in a prompt, like a description of what they want, and then it produces some images of that. I'm like, what? That's crazy. I'm like, huh, okay. So one day, a few days later, I was at a brewery with one of my colleagues, Father Timothy Sainquist, who was there at Chesterton Academy at the time, and I just casually showed him sort of some sample images of this prototype technology, and he was sort of blown away as well. And we both got sort of the idea at the same time. This would be really cool if we could employ this technology for, in service of the church in some way, like making images of saints. And, we both were like, oh, yeah, duh, of course, that's a no brainer. And eventually, this program Dolly was available to the public, and so we both messed around with it, and we tried to do some saint art with it, but it was that was sort of unsuccessful. It was more just like ludicrous experimental stuff, like a cave drawing of the discovery of quantum physics and stuff like that. A lot of like a steampunk unicorn, just a bunch of garbage, right? But then Father Timothy Sainquist found Midjourney, which is kind of considered maybe the best AI art program currently. And he informed me about that. So then I just went to work on experimenting with that, and that definitely had very satisfying results. And I was just sort of hooked. And I've spent many hours just I think I've published somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 images of Catholic saints. Usually, I try to do on average 10 images of a saint per day. I don't always get there, but and I've the main platform I publish these on is Reddit, but I also have an Instagram thing. I tried Twitter a little bit, but man, that was got some vitriolic comments on X. On Reddit and Instagram, it's mostly positive. But yeah, definitely I've encountered a ton of controversy. I've been enjoying going back and forth on that. And, my views on AI, a lot of it's very amorphous still. The primary thing I want is a balanced approach as we try to grapple with this new technology. I want to, I don't want people to be overly accepting of it indiscriminately. That seems like that would be a really bad idea. Also, I don't want people needlessly to condemn it. Again, I want an Aristotelian approach as we figure out how to use this technology well. Because I think it can be used well. I've definitely seen a lot of fruits of it. A lot of people regularly contact me saying how it's inspired them in their faith, seeing these images of saints that are much more appealing than most religious art, sadly. I mean, there's obviously been like tons and tons of great religious art over the history of the church. A lot of contemporary art of saints oftentimes are a bit tacky and uninspirational. Just the other day, a person said that they have a devotion to Saint Joseph Cupertino, and they use the images I made of him, especially how he levitates and stuff. In his prayer life, I think daily, he said. And, he said he tried to find some more traditionally hand drawn or hand painted images of Joseph Cupertino, and he said they were garbage. And I can relate to it because I've noticed when I've Googled images of saints for whatever project I was working on, yeah, it's really disappointing most of the time. Sometimes it's the greatest art of all time, especially the Renaissance era stuff. but oftentimes it's just really soulless. And it's funny because a lot of people say, AI art lacks soul and lacks heart. And I'm like, I think it's oftentimes the other way around. Not always. Sometimes AI art can be very lifeless looking, but sometimes, it's actually like unusually aesthetically pleasing. And so I'm like, okay, there has to be some good use of this technology. And, making images of saints, I think is, a pretty good justifiable employment of it. So that's it in a nutshell. How that all came about.
Great. Well, there's a lot in what you said there, and I can certainly see my way around to sympathizing to the extent of kind of let's say steel manning on a couple of points that you brought out. I'll make no bones about it. I can definitely resonate with the overwhelming tackiness and schlocky kind of images that are out there in widest circulation, let's just say, whether it be with certain publishing houses on the covers of hymnals, or whether it be whoever it was that got to design, let's say, the logo for this year's Jubilee year, or for the Synod on Synodality. There are, and this isn't just disputing matters of taste, viewers and listeners. I mean, we can disagree, but and again, hopefully disagree in Chestertonian ways. If you disagree with what I just said, please let me know down in the comments. But I do think that there is that concern. Now, on the flip side, I think that on this whole, total issue, I may come down a little more so on the side of the critics in various ways for reasons maybe that we can get into, ethical and maybe distributist leaning. But before we go there, Lee, do you have anything that you'd like to add, or any thoughts that came to mind as Julian was sort of explaining the background?
I'm interested in Julian's thoughts about the topic. As Joe knows, because we had this discussion just a couple of days ago, I'm not a huge fan of AI. So I've spent almost 20 years in the IT industry before working for the Chesterton Society. So I come from a background in technology, and I've always been the one that kind of held off on kind of the sentient role of work and art. So it's going to be an interesting dialogue. Would love to talk about how you feel, the role of creation on the side of a human, creating, if you're talking icons for the church or art for the church, and where that kind of gets now distributed out past the human element to something that's, more non-human. And we can go into the depths of that as well, because of course, as we know, and we should probably clarify, AI isn't making this up, off the top of its head, right? It's taking different elements from different pieces of art. So maybe one of the questions I have as well is, as you're creating this AI art, are you asking or are you trying to emulate a sort of artistic style? So maybe walk through that process a little bit. That'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've amassed maybe 100 different sort of artistic styles, basically, that I experiment with for each single saint that I make, basically. So, and that's from art history, I've looked at other AI productions of other people and say, ooh, that looks good. That could be used for a saint. And so I cycle through multiple different styles and whatnot. But yeah, it could be as simple sometimes, like if you're doing a Saint Francis of Assisi image, you type in the prompt Saint Francis of Assisi, enter, and Midjourney does 4 images at a time. And you might, be lucky and strike gold and like, ooh, that's a fantastic image right there.
Yeah.
If you don't specify the style, then it can be pretty random. But yeah, and it a lot of people say, oh, it just doesn't take any skill whatsoever, and it's true. You might get lucky and just have a fantastic image, first roll of dice, if you will. But a lot of times that doesn't work, right? So it takes about, I don't know, 1 to 2 hours on average to come up with roughly 10 images of a saint that I'm satisfied with. So I have to cycle through hundreds and hundreds, right? And I have to discern, like, okay, is this in the right time period? This thing that he's doing with his arm, is that symbolic of something that makes sense, or does that not make any sense?
Hmm.
The toughest thing is finding the errors. And of course, AI is famous for getting the hands wrong because the hands have all this, this weird,
Shadows and everything
yeah,
else. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I have to 50% of the time, I'd say, tell Midjourney to, like, I trace a part of the image saying, okay, try this again because you screwed up, right? And so it'll give me some other permutations of that. Also, sometimes when the Midjourney just can't get something right, I go to Photoshop if I want, if there's enough potential in this image that I want to show, and I have to fix it very manually in that way. So there is skill. I've definitely encountered a lot of users of AI art that are just terrible at it. I was hired by a guy who says he uses AI art. He uses Midjourney every day, and he's like, I can't figure it out, and so he hired me to do a bunch of images. So there is some amount of skill, at least still at this point. And also, when you're trying to convey some sort of meaning about the saint, it's a matter of like, okay, which images do I want, right? And so
Yeah.
there's a certain discernment there. Father Sanquist came up with 3 points about like what makes good art, and roughly speaking, it's the aesthetics, basically like what is visually pleasing. And I'd say AI art, that's its strong point oftentimes. Second is like the intellectual meaning behind it, and that with a AI artwork, that kind of depends on the user. Like if the user doesn't know what he's talking about, he can convey something terrible with the image that he ends up picking. And so that does depend on the user to some extent. Then the third one is sort of the causal value of the artwork, right? And that's where AI art is, the least valuable, basically, because it's easy to do. Like if you generate a big painting of something, that's not as impressive to the viewer if it's hand drawn, right? Like if there's a history behind it and it was
Yeah.
difficult for the artist to do it, that's more inspirational, right?
Right.
So yeah, AI art, is really good with the aesthetics. It can be, good for like the meaning, the intellectual value, if the user knows what he's doing, and then it's crap on the causal value of it.
Yeah, I think I loved your description of that because you are describing how you're using AI as a tool in the creative process, right?
Right.
And that's yeah, and I think that's a very important distinction even for listeners is you're not just saying, hey, create this and whatever pops out, that's what you're gonna call
Right.
maybe sacred art or even art of the saints, but you're really saying, look, I'm throwing mud on the wall, I'm seeing what sticks, I'm using that for a creative process, maybe even a trigger for you to make things better
Yes.
or more appealing. So
Absolutely.
that's an interesting distinction. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of analogous to if you're doing a painting and maybe you're painting some stars, and maybe you kind of flick your brush to get those stars. Maybe it'll sort of randomly end up in an aesthetically pleasing sense. Maybe it won't, and you're like,
Right.
actually no. So it's even if there's a certain sort of random element to when you're creating any sort of art. It's if you accept the outcome, then it becomes intentional. If you are saying like whatever happens happens, then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, that's kind of, well, that's garbage then. That's
Yeah.
not meaningful,
Yeah.
right?
I will say that flicking the brush at the canvas to make stars is true as you describe it, unless you're Bob Ross, in which case they're always stars. So somehow I don't know,
Yeah, well, yeah, actually,
flawlessly. It's
They're
just
yeah.
always happy accidents.
And he says
happy
like,
stars. Yeah,
this was a happy little accident. Like when he actually
right.
accidentally does something, you could say like right when he makes an accident, that's in the Aristotelian sense not art, because art has to be when you intentionally make something. But if you make a mistake, you're like, whoops. But then if you intentionally decide to accept the mistake and incorporate it into the work, then it becomes art, right?
Yeah.
So likewise, and so in general, the question is AI art, right? In the Aristotelian sense, right? Is it being made intentionally, or is it
Hmm.
just a mindless, non-intentional machine making it?
Right.
And it could be non-intentional. I mean, if a human is telling it, make whatever, I guess there's some intention. But I mean, it's more complicated if you're going to do it well, because you have to decide what images to keep. You know, you got to correct the flaws in it if there's any. You know, what are you going to do with the image? And you know, what meaning do you want to convey? Do you have to answer? So there is definitely intention behind it, and so I think it does fulfill the definition of art. But is it less intentional than if you're just hand drawing a painting? Yeah, probably. And so again, in the causal aspect of this kind of art, it's definitely reduced. And so when you're talking about sacred art, is that going to have an impact on you know, someone who's viewing like an AI generated image of a saint in a church? Probably. A lot of people obviously hate AI art, and so they're going to scoff at it anyway. But yeah, if there's a sense like, oh, this wasn't, you know, handcrafted by a human, that's going to be, you know, less impactful, obviously. And so I think as a general rule, AI religious art should not be used in a sacred context, at least not in a church, for that reason. Now, am I a hardliner on that? Maybe not. I mean, maybe if like if there's an apocalypse and you know there's no like a diocese doesn't have any handcrafted religious art and there's, you know, surviving AI art. Oh, yeah, okay, sure, they can use that in church if it's inspiring people, you know. So, but in general, I think it's a good idea not to use it for sacred purposes. But you know, there's religious art that doesn't have to be used on a, you know, sacred, uh, you know, involved church related way. But for private devotions, I think it can be fine. And I've heard again many people say like, yeah, I use your images for, you know, private devotional prayer and whatnot. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think too, it's good to interject at this point to and enter into this conversation a bit of a de-woo, that is, listeners, of this subject matter, because I know the tropes that tend to go around out there, and while, as I said, I think that at the end of the day, I'm going to come down more on a little bit of the critical side here. I think you know, I always try to begin by dispelling those arguments which I would not hang my hat on, and that I would not want to espouse, because for me, honest argument is about getting to the truth of matters rather than any stick is good enough, right? To beat my opponent with. And so I would say, you know, in the aspect of de-wooing, everything that we've talked about so far and the way we've talked about it, I think indicates something very important, that there's no agency that we can describe per se to this technology. And I think that there are many out there that would want to assign, and I mean agency in a classical sense
I think
here.
you could in terms of efficient cause, because one type of efficient cause is instrumental cause, and I'd say
Yeah, right. But I'm speaking more of agency in the sense of a moral actor, right?
yeah,
And
correct.
this is where we, you know, again, you look in the com boxes of these articles, look at some of the articles that have been written around the internet. This is demons, right? Or whatever. Now, take the position if you will. The onus is on you to demonstrate that, because I think otherwise we get down a very, very slippery slope, and also a very superstitious slope, when we begin to assign those kinds of agencies simply outside of processes that we understand. Otherwise, you know, why don't I believe that it's demons sending the encryption token of my bank password when I go in to check my balances at the end of each month or whatever? So I would just caution against that sort of unreflective sort of criticism of these things, because I think that two things. First of all, as I say, it could lead to a kind of superstition and a kind of negative pattern of illogical thinking. And two, I think that it undermines any valid critique that you might want to then later make or bring to the table. So anyway, just wanted to kind of throw that in there, because I thought as you talked, it's all about what you're doing with the technology. And I've used the analogy before of Michelangelo with a Rube Goldberg machine, that he presses a marble down a path, and then like 5 minutes later a hammer swings down on a lever and hits a piece of marble. Okay, it's not really satisfying, but all of the steps in that process are human designed, theoretically, and also if to the extent that Michelangelo understands the machine, manipulable by him. Now, again, that's not a perfect analogy because at the end of the day, there are steps in this that not even as creators understand, but we can maybe get into that. Yeah.
Yeah. No. So obviously, demons have come up in my debates about this.
They always do.
And,
Yeah.
yeah. Right. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. The burden of proof is on the person who thinks that it is demons. The church with exorcisms say you do an exorcism when you've ruled out the natural possible causes for what's happening with the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the main way to figure out if demons are at work is if there's some aversion to the divine, right? That's kind of the big one. And I type in the name of Jesus oftentimes when I'm creating images of Jesus and Mary and etc., right? And there's no aversion, there's no air like no, right? So that's pretty good evidence that demons are not fueling this. Maybe not complete waterproof evidence, but I'm pretty satisfied. Now, occasionally, some people complain when they're using AI, especially with images. So sometimes something creepy happens, like there's kind of this like dark figure in the background with sort of a scary face, right? And it's like, okay, is that a product of demons or is it the AI just screwing up, right? For who knows what reason? And it's so it's like see, it's evil, right? And it's like no, and could be just some creepy randomness. Now, when that happens, what you could do is just Photoshop that part out, and boom, problem solved, right? Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
There's something else I wanted to say about demons. If you think AI art is demonically fueled, I would say there would be still some reason to use it, just like to try to understand the mind of the enemy, right? Just like how we study demonology to to figure out how to protect ourselves against demons, and especially if you think if you're a teacher and you have to deal with plagiarism, possible AI plagiarism, then use ChatGPT so you can kind of develop your instincts on when that's at play. So so even if you think AI is bad, don't dig your head in the sand. Use it and to improve your arguments, to become more informed on what you're talking about. I would encourage people on that camp to do something like that at least.
Yeah, I have created a lot of turtles driving tanks. I'm not sure how that's informing my spiritual art, but I what I think is interesting too. Maybe we'll get to that in the conference with your talk and everything else, is that Joe, you were talking specifically about a mechanism in place that even Michelangelo is using, like this very passive mechanism. I think it's an interesting discussion when you talk more about what was traditionally a very human thing, like the ability to create, right? And taking that as from the creator of being able to create. Orestes Bronson wrote this amazing book, Saint Worship, right? And kind of talked about this whole thing about why he was a Protestant, became Catholic. Why is it okay for Catholics to worship saints and things like that? And it's always this kind of this hierarchy of creativity, right? So God created the saint, and then the saint, right, is what the Catholic is then revering through art, through sacred art and things like that. And that's because you're really just pointed up to the creator, the God who's creating these things. So at what point is AI kind of decoupling that a bit, because you're now separating the creative process, at least the initial one, from anything that would have been like a passive machine that you're just clicking on and helping chip wood, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it can be separated, but I might be wrong about that. But yeah, the sense that if an artist makes a piece of art and he did it from raw materials and no one else sort of helped him make that thing, then the causal value increases, and I guess we appreciate that because it's more reflective of the divine, because God created the universe, he didn't like have help in that. Although I guess maybe the angels helped, and that's another debate. But anyway, with AI, you had multiple people programming the technology to make it. It's drawing from a bunch of pre-existing images, and there's just less. There's more than one person sort of at work that's basically producing this image, as it were, right? It's not just from raw materials to boom, artistic product. But it's less reflective of the divine, I guess you could say, maybe in that way. I think similar to how photography is kind of that way, right? Where there's the artist takes a picture and is like, well, how involved was he in that process? Because he's using some sort of pre-existing thing in front of him, and he probably didn't make the camera, right? So it's less artistically impressive and valuable compared to if he hand paints that image or something. So yeah, I think and I'm still trying to flush this very part out, but I think it's because more people were involved in creating an AI image than like a painter who's kind of doing it solo. And I think that's why we're like, not as great in that department, I think, but I don't know. I'm still flushing that out. With that said, I think like there was always going to be a human element into a human saying to an AI, make an image, right? There's just less so. It's less, I don't know, direct or something, and therefore we kind of are less moved by it for that reason or something. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, well, it was more just kind of it's an interesting, I think, thought experiment that would be fun to walk through. Especially coming from a side of kind of skepticism, it's always interesting to hear arguments on that side. The photography one's a great one. I think I'd like to flesh that out kind of in my mind as well. And yeah, maybe we could go for hours. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. On that note, I will say, viewers, listeners, at the conference this summer, Julian obviously is going to flesh out these ideas in his talk, and anybody that goes to the conference, though, knows and will tell you that where the real hashing out of ideas takes place is at our famous afterglows. And Julian and I have had some roaring ones over the years. And Julian, I'm going to ask you to block out some time on the calendar this year, because I have 7 objections I want to throw at you.
Nice.
But I'm gonna tease one. I'm gonna just tease one today for the listeners. And I think it's probably the one most neutral of the kind of other hot flash button point of this, which is the sacred nature, right? So this is actually somewhat removed from that, at least theoretically. You mentioned, a lot of shtick, a lot of bad art, a lot of terrible things. On the other hand, speaking as someone who knows several, wonderful working Catholic artists, and the great work that they're doing, I would highly commend actually taking a look at the artwork that was put together for Catholic Answers calendar this year, which was sacred art by contemporary artists that they went out and sourced from. So as somebody who's concerned with that, how would you answer the objection that, as you say, this is compelling, it's easy, it lowers the barrier of entry, it basically can be devoid of remuneration in many contexts. The let's say economic difficulty raised by that in other words, this is just one more job market that an easy technology potentially might push people out of, precisely at a time when, if anything, we're more called to or should be funding the work of the people that are doing it well.
Yeah. So basically, it's going to make artists starve even more, possibly, right? Yeah. No, it's great. It's obviously a super important issue. So yeah, couple things. I'd say that this technology is going to go forward basically no matter what. So I would say then artists, more traditional artists, should actually jump on board and use this technology, because they're probably equipped to use it better than anyone else, just because they've developed their artistic senses. And they had the same fear when just digital art, Photoshop and whatnot, was being developed. It's like, this is going to drive artists out of business. But it didn't, especially like the artists who kind of incorporated their traditional techniques with that new technology. They tended to survive more. And again, at least at this point, there is a difference. I mean, there is a skill difference with AI users. Like, some can use it well, some can use it badly. So I would all the more tell artists to jump on board and start experimenting with this, and see how they could, monetize it, because I think they still can. There's just a general theme throughout history when obviously a new technology comes about. People are afraid that it's going to put a lot of people out of business. There's some evidence when they developed metallurgy that the flint knappers were pretty angry about that. With the printing press, certainly that was going to put copyists out
All
of
those
business.
monks out of business, huh?
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly right. But plumbing, would put water carriers out of business. And it's like, well, those people could go into this new field in some way and figure out how to, obviously survive in that capacity. So I'd also say, like, relatedly, that it'd be great if more good people would use AI technology in general rather than just bad people. Right. I wrote an article in Gilbert Magazine titled "Baptize this technology as fast as possible." Right. So, this technology is probably here to stay. And it can, it gets trained and molded by its users. And so it's like, well, let's have good, wise people jump on board and start training it and start using it for good. Otherwise, proportionally, it's just going to be used for evil more, right? And so, yeah, I'd say that relates with your artistic question. Now, with the printing press, the Protestants jumped aboard that technology way faster than the Catholics, at least in England, and that was one of the main reasons why England fell away from the Catholic faith, because Protestants employed that technology for propaganda much more effectively. You could say the internet too. A lot of I remember a lot of people saying, the internet's evil. It's bad. What Christians should stay away from it. And that's why, the atheists kind of temporarily just dominated it for a while, especially like, 10, 20 years ago. It seemed like every single forum I would go to, atheists would be everywhere. Right. And there's just not enough Christians having a presence on the internet. And eventually, we're taking it back. But I think that was a huge disaster. I think Christians and just good people, wise people, should have been using the internet more to prevent the proportionally greater amount of atheists who just spread their seeds all over the place. And that obviously was an entryway to wokeism in many ways and all sorts of disasters. So it's but yeah, with that said, will this drive some people out of business? Probably, but I don't see how good people staying away from the technology is going to help. It's probably going to make it worse.
Well, I'll put on my X commenter hat here and pretend I'm somebody on the space formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah.
So your answer is learn to code, right? That's
sort of learn to code.
No, that would be so. Again, viewers, listeners, that is not how we argue as Chestertonians. That would, but that I could actually see somebody on Twitter just say no. So learn to code.
Yeah.
No, I think that was well answered. I have a couple of ripostes that I would make, but not here because this is just a teaser. You got to come to the conference, and you have to stand nearby with a beer in your hand in order to hear the sequel. So
yeah, definitely. No, one little addendum is they were worried that when recorded music was invented, that no one would go to concerts anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, at least afterwards, people went to concerts more because they wanted to hear their favorite recorded music in person more. So optimistically, hopefully, AI art will actually make people appreciate handcrafted art more, and maybe that'll become more of a prized commodity. That's optimistic, but hopefully, something like that would happen. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think this kind of brings us to toward the close of our time. You've been generous with your time, Julian, and I thank you. And as Lee mentioned, we could probably go on for hours, and we will, but we won't do it. We won't do it here. We'll do it in person down in the Big Easy. Lee, any last thoughts before we wrap up?
No, it's a really interesting discussion. I really appreciate, Julian, how you're able to clearly articulate your position. I think this is going to be really valuable for people that are finding this podcast and maybe interested in, their place in the art world and AI. So just really appreciate your time and your thoughtfulness.
No, thank you for being good interviewers that didn't kill me. Well, yeah, I'll have a lot. I'll address a lot more objections in my talk, especially the one where they say AI steals from other artists. I'll address that one for sure.
All right.
I'll be all over
Great.
that one.
All right, that's one of my 7, so we're gonna have to see whether or not it's sufficiently answered, or if I can poke some holes in it. But that's great. Well, again, thank you, Julian. It's been great,
It has been. Thank you. Awesome.
and thank you, Lee.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe.
And thank you, viewers and listeners. Again, agree, disagree, just do so agreeably, whatever it happens to be. And please do so down in the comments, because if you're having a conversation down there, one of those other AI functions running around out there, the YouTube algorithm, will look at that and say, hey, this content's interesting. Maybe I should show it to more people, and more people can discover the wit and wisdom of G.K. Chesterton with your help. In the meantime, please, while you're having that discussion, head on over to our page, chesterton.org/conference. Sign up for the conference. Come in person to New Orleans at the end of July. Hear the remainder of this great discussion and so many other great discussions besides, and enjoy those infamous afterglows where we know more than anywhere else Chesterton is better with friends. Till next episode, God bless.